free will, that's over.
That's over.
Over.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing, it changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed, and of course this has a big impact on your identity.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
It's backed by Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, NASA, and the CIA. Each one costs $10 million and operates at 459 degrees below zero.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
They call it the infinity machine, quantum computing.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology well enough, and nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo nor the KGB could do it. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. We humans should get used to the idea that we are no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals. Data might enable human elites to do something even more radical than just build digital dictatorships. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it. And if indeed we succeed in hacking and engineering life, this will be not just the greatest revolution in the history of humanity. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life 4 billion years ago. For 4 billion years, nothing fundamental changed in the basic rules of the game of life. All of life, for 4 billion years, dinosaurs, amoebas, tomatoes, humans, all of life was subject to the laws of natural selection and to the laws of organic biochemistry. But this is now about to change. Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds, the IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud. These are the new driving forces of evolution. And at the same time, science may enable life after being confined for 4 billion years to the limited realm of organic compounds. Science may enable life to break out into the inorganic realm. So after 4 billion years of organic life shaped by natural selection, we are entering the era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. So does the data about my DNA, my brain, my body, my life, does it belong to me or to some corporation or to the government or perhaps to the human collective? humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. Free will, that's over.
That's over.
Over. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Yeah, I mean, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see, we have no chance. So is maybe the most important development of the 21st century is this ability to hack human beings, to go under the skin, collect biometric data, analyze it, and understand people better than they understand themselves. This, I believe, is maybe the most important event of the 21st century.
If you go all the way back to Norwood Wiener, the goal of creating artificial intelligence was to create an all-seeing eye, a global computer that sees all, sees everything, and to become gods.
And the Sentient World Simulation, SWS, went live in 2007.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe? These nanobots, these blood cell-sized devices, will be going in our bodies. We'll have some go inside our brains through the capillaries, non-invasively. They'll be interacting with our biological neurons. They'll put our brains on the internet, and they'll also enable us to enter a virtual reality environment from within the nervous system. So if I want to go in a virtual reality environment, the nanobots will shut down the signals coming from my real eyes and my real skin and create the signals that would be appropriate for the virtual environment. And then it'll feel like I'm in that environment.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
If we have algorithms that stimulate the right things and give it the right data, they could reprogram you in a way without you even knowing it. We call it hallucinating, right? But these would be controlled hallucinations run by algorithms. So you think you're in control of your own will, but it's actually some evil AI or evil people controlling everything we do, and we're more like zombies, you know? Like we think we're free and we're not actually free.
It is called the Sentient World Simulation. The program's aim, according to its creator, is to be a continuously running, continually updated mirror model of the entire planet, complete with billions of nodes representing every person on the Earth.
Targets and mind-controlled victims have their minds linked up for life with conscious supercomputers, which send a steady stream of bidirectional, low-frequency electromagnetic radiation to the target's brain.
And what people have to realize is that these targeted individuals are basically the test stage for rolling all of this madness out to all 7 billion of us on this planet.
And this was a white paper put out by Purdue University in 2006, and the Sentient World Simulation, SWS, went live in 2007, which represents every person on the planet within this computer matrix as a node, and every node is given an avatar, an identifier. And that is real-time, 24/7 monitoring of every person on the planet. This is primarily, but not exclusively, facilitated by the adiabatic quantum computers produced by D-Wave Corporation.
At the time of initial reports on the program, there were only 62 country-level simulations being run by the US Department of Defense. These simulations grouped humans into composites, with 100 individuals acting as a single node. But already at that time, the US Army had used the systems to create a one-to-one level simulation of potential Army recruits.
It's the stuff of a Hollywood movie, but a group of veterans has filed a lawsuit against the CIA and US Army claiming that the government planted remote-controlled devices in their brains. The claims relate to a government program at the US Army's Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland.
The ultimate aim would be to archive enough data on each individual to be able to make a computer model of everyone on the planet.
In the human genome, we have a finite in the hundreds of thousands of different genes across our species. And we mapped them out in the Human Gene Project. Well, now it's the Human Mind Project, the Global Brain Project. President Obama just recently funded a whole bunch of scientists to decipher the mind. Well, our previous president, same thing, George Bush, said the same thing. They're trying to decipher every possible thought and uniqueness due to culture and language and whatnot.
And the goal is to make a cognitive model or map of the victim's brain. Ultimately, the system replicates and digitizes the will, intellect, and emotions, the soul of the targets, and downloads this back into the conscious computer.
Robots the smartest people. Artificial intelligence, AI. The idea is to port the software from the human brain. First, we're going to need lots of cheap, fast, parallel computers.
He was referring to parallel processors, about servers. What he did not state was that it is actually the quantum computer systems coming out of D-Wave that actually creates and drives this new matrix known as the SWS. It is not transistor-based servers that run this. They are qubits, quantum bits. It is the SWS and D-Wave that comprises this new matrix.
Second, we're going to need to scan individual human brains and find spatial and chemical detail to see exactly what cells are where, connected to what, or what type.
We could scan my brain from inside, sending scanners through the bloodstream, billions of them, in the form of nanorobots or nanobots, and capture every detail of my synapses and neurotransmitters and create a virtual Ray Kurzweil in a very powerful computer. And it would be indistinguishable from me. It would pass a Ray Kurzweil Turing test.
And third, we're going to need computer models of how each kind of brain cell works, taking input signals, changing interval state, and sending output signals. If we have good enough models of all the kinds of brain cells and a good enough model of a brain, we can put it together to make a good enough model of an entire brain, and that model would have the same input-output behavior as the original. So if you talk to it, it might talk back. If you ask it to do things, it might do them. And if we could do that, everything would change.
The Manhattan Project gave us the atomic bomb. The Genome Project gave us the human genome. The third great initiative could be the Connectome Project, to map the entire human brain. And that may take a quantum computer.
Okay, the first thing I can tell you is that M's spend most of their life in virtual reality. While this is what you would look like in virtual reality, this is what an M would look like when virtual reality. It's computer hardware sitting in a server rack somewhere. But still, it could see and experience the same thing. But some things are different for M's. An M can make archive copies, and with enough redundant archives, an M can be immortal, in principle, though not usually in practice. And an M can move its brain, the computer that represents its brain, from one physical location to another. M's can actually move around the world at the speed of light. And by moving to a new location, they can interact more quickly with M's near that new location.
Emulation is really what we talk about in the SWS as the nodes, the avatars. Every single person on the planet, okay, out of Purdue University's own paper in 2006, every person is assigned a avatar. They're represented computationally in the AI system that drives the SWS as a computer node, but they're given an avatar marker. Take the avatar and hang the word emulation on it. In other words, they've been tracking us, they've been reproducing us, reproducing our metadata for years.
We can model every single atom, every single molecule with a three-dimensional structure in every single brain.
They claim they've modeled the personality of every adult in the United States, 230 million people. And SCL, the mothership group, they do work in any number of countries. They're involved in politics in many countries. They put together a micro-shot personality assessment for everyone.
M's are very much like humans, but they are not like the typical human. The typical M is a copy of the few hundred most productive humans.
If you construct a model of the human brain, you can then plug people into this hive mind. You could, as an intermediate step, take these duplicated neurons, artificial warm and wet qubits, as I call them, and you can integrate those into an actual human mind. Thus, you are able to control that human mind with artificial neurons and then have those minds connected to each other, just like you network and daisy chain computer systems. That is the hive mind.
And this means that in the future, communications could be done mentally. What I'm saying is that the internet will be replaced by BrainNet.
They control the mind the same way that they teach the AI computer systems at the high level of AI. We're not talking about cars and trains and planes and automobiles. Okay, we're talking about AI that is so sophisticated that it operates a sentient world simulation, so sophisticated that it actually taps in and controls the mind.
And Google was the primary interested party that pulled this whole thing together. What they're going to do is apply this machine to an area that I think is fundamentally important. It's a crux of our future as humans, and that's, can we build machines like us?
We can model every single atom, every single molecule with a three-dimensional structure in your entire brain.
That level of precision will keep advancing to the point where it's absolutely indistinguishable, even at the very, microscopic level. So you could recreate an entity that's, even if you looked inside of it, its simulated brain would be processing information just the way I do.
If you start looking at quantum computing and where it's going, it's pretty freaky sort of stuff. And thinking about the world as an electrical universe and the fact that we are energetic electrical beings, that's how we work. Everything is electrical. Every signal that runs through our body is electricity. Every thought we have, everything we feel, every touch, everything we speak, it's all the result of electromagnetic signals floating around our body, impulses that come from our heart, from our brain, the way we feel a bench when we touch it. This is an electrical signal that's sent to your brain that tells you what the bench feels like. So it's all electromagnetics. It's all firing of electromagnetism through our synapses and all this sort of stuff.
The adiabatic quantum computer is linked to 7 billion human brains. It is now, in its own language of cryptology, able to function independent of any oversight throughout the world with its own form of communication, its own form of code. And it is able to link everyone on the planet at this point.
We can model every single atom, every single molecule with a three-dimensional structure in every single brain.
They claim they've modeled the personality of every adult in the United States, 230 million people. And SCL, the mothership group, they do work in any number of countries. They're involved in politics in many countries. They put together a micro-shot personality assessment for everyone.
What I am principally is not this material stuff, but a pattern of information. Well, then if the pattern is the essence, and if you copy the pattern to whatever level of precision you need, then that copy that has the exact same pattern should be me.
They're running everything that's happening in society parallel, and they've got a little dot in their matrix for everybody. But this is a game society. They know where it's been, they know where it's going, and they know where it's going because they're steering people into the direction it wants to go.
There are an enormous number, mind-bogglingly large number, of parallel realities, as real as this one, that have different consistent histories. So imagine a world where all of the laws of physics as we know them are obeyed, but different decisions were made along the way. Different decisions at the level of tiny microscopic particles, different decisions all the way up to what you chose to eat for lunch, and whether you chose to come to this session or not.
This is an article from 10 years ago. Sentient World, War Games on the Grandest Scale. The DoD is developing a parallel to planet Earth with billions of individual nodes to reflect every man, woman and child this side of the dividing line between reality and AR.
It's absolutely indistinguishable, even at the very, microscopic level. So you could recreate an entity that's, even if you looked inside of it, its simulated brain would be processing information just the way I do.
Deep state has merged the quantum computer with the sentient world simulation. And the true reason for all this data collection is to feed it into this AI machine to predict and manipulate the course of humanity.
Their ability to look at data in a quantum, artificial intelligence manner, it's just going to be an unstoppable monster.
And this is bizarre because we don't see those other things. But science has reached the point now where we can build machines that exploit those other worlds.
So Google was set up 18, 19 years ago to build a giant artificial supercomputer based on the neuron activities of the hive mind of humanity, with billions of people wired into it with the Internet of Things. And so all of our thoughts go into it.
And yes, they're in the cloud, but it's actually encrypted and kept private for you, and we do a pretty good job with that.
And we're actually building a computer that has real neurons in real time that's also psychically connected to us, that are organic creatures.
You are connected as an organic computer. I mean, this is one of the most quote-unquote conspiratory theories that's been around for many years, decades. But the reality is we're now facing the reality of that. It is no longer a conspiracy, and quite frankly, it terrifies me.
Even now, the sentient world simulation is watching you learn about it, and inside its intelligent mind is creating a second you, running different scenarios against you to see how you react.
You know, hearing voices is not a sign of mental illness necessarily. You have to consider that it can be a military technology. And this is the greatest, I would say, insult to medical doctors, that we are not taught this. No medical doctors generally know of military technology that you can, with synthetic telepathy, make people hear voices in their heads.
Voice to skull.
Apparatus for audibly communicating speech using the radio frequency hearing effect. Now we're getting into transmitting voices directly into people's heads. A modulation process with a fully suppressed carrier and input processor filtering to produce an encoded output. For amplitude modulation and audio speech processor filtering. Intelligible subjective sound is produced when the encoded signal is demodulated using the RF hearing effect. So again, they've got diagrams here explaining exactly how this can be done. We're talking about putting speech through various frequencies being decoded by the human brain as an actual voice.
There's nothing crazy about it, even if...
So can you expand on that exactly?
Well, like telepathy.
Yeah.
You know, the thing with mind control is very bad because they call it synthetic telepathy. They can induce thoughts in you. They can induce voices in your head. And of course, voices in your head that you're crazy, you know. They can do that, and they have done that from, at least officially, from the Iraqi First War. They gave orders to soldiers straight into their head. Of course, they were guinea pigs.
American soldiers?
American, yeah, right. And if this technology...
Did they use it on the enemy as well?
Yes, in a way, because I always remember I was so shocked when I saw a picture when soldiers came from bunkers, Iraqi soldiers. They had bunkers and about 3-yard walls, you know. They had drinks and food for 6 months. Americans had sent helicopters above, and they had Arabic-speaking interpreters who spoke Arabic to them, and they were sending, with microwaves, orders to come out. They were being mind-controlled, and all of a sudden, all the guys came out. With no reason at all. Nobody attacked physically. It was just done with mind control.
You know, when you know you're on the side of right, you know, you have that grace of God, I guess, with you when you know you're doing the right thing. And the right thing's not always the easiest thing. Like I told you, I never in a million years planned on being the one of the spearheads.
Now, you were telling me that during the break. How did you, it just like, wow, it just got, and now you've learned more and more about it.
Well, after the book came out and I had, you know, thousands of other victims come forward and say thank you for putting a book out on it and using whatever, you know, cred that I have with having a couple of initials behind my name. Not that that's any big thing. But the one thing that I was happy that the book did is I had a lot of families call me and say, you know what, we have a son that's been complaining about hearing voices and complaining of government surveillance. We've had him to 5 different psychiatrists. They've shocked him. They've had him on meds. It never goes away. Now we have a little better understanding about maybe what he's dealing with. And if that had only happened once, it would have been worth having wrote the book. It's happened hundreds of times where people have actually, let psychiatrists do electroconvulsive therapy on loved ones that were voicing these complaints. Now we're kind of going toward an educational campaign. We need to educate at least local psychiatrists. Now, at the top of the psychiatric chain, Canadian Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association, they know very well what these websites.
Oh, they're the people running it.
Yeah, they're the ones who started a lot of the MK Ultra programs that have advanced to where we're at now. Now, at the local level, where you're being maybe mandated to see a psychiatrist, they probably are largely ignorant of the technology. But unfortunately, no matter how much proof these victims put in front of psychiatrists, they're not looking at anything.
Well, that's the question. How do you tell, because you've always been contacted by real schizophrenics then, how do you tell somebody who's crazy versus somebody who...
Well, the bottom line is schizophrenia usually starts at an early age. Most of the victims that I'm talking to can pinpoint the time their stalking started and their hearing voices started, and typically it's late 30s, early 40s. You just don't see that with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is usually 18 to 28 in a male. It can be a little bit later in a female. So now what's happening is a lot of these victims are being diagnosed with delusional disorder or psychosis otherwise specified, which means you've got something going on and we don't know what it is. On top of that, the medications won't treat this. Having worked with a lot of these victims that are hearing voices that are being put into their head, not from schizophrenia, most of them kind of have an idea of where it's coming from. Some of them are wrong because the technology is meant to foster a wrong belief, make you think it's your relatives or your parents or your work, when in reality, at least from what we found with counter surveillance in San Antonio, it's usually a private investigative group made up of former federal employees.
Yeah, that's why you've been on the news. You guys have actually caught people before in the act.
Exactly.
Wow. Oh, man, I tell you. And so you've got over 1 million private contractors operating domestically just in PSYOPs, they admit.
There's too many clearances out there. Too many clearances. And, looking at mind control technology, they've always contracted it out. It's never done directly by the CIA, not since the 60s.
Absolutely. Wow.
Looking at my channel analytics, I have realized that my audience is above the age of 25, and predominantly between the age of 35 to 44 years old. Something got me thinking. There are way too many old victims, too old to be schizophrenic.
3. That can cause insanity, and it was an experiment. One of the experiments was to take an ordinary sane person, cause insanity, and have a psychiatrist who was unknown to everybody diagnose schizophrenia, or paranoia or a psychiatric illness. That was a successful outcome. And the person would spend the rest of their life in an asylum in misery, but to the government scientists that was a success. Black Project scientist Dr. Barry Trower.
Incoming voice detection.
And it can be proven by Blue Mouse. I had exchanged some emails with Elton Byrd before he died, and he was a Navy scientist who was engaged in these technologies. And he said that the Blue Mouse is world's most sensitive microphone. If somebody says, I hear voices in my head, so you put the Blue Mouse onto the skull of this person. And this microphone, Blue Mouse, takes the words, the sentences that the person hears, and everybody in the same room can hear it. So it is not a sign of mental illness. It is military action towards this person with electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic beams, radiation. And of course it's criminal. But this can be absolutely proven. But how many know a Blue Mouse? Very few, I would say.
Well, let me go down the list of some of these that I came up with. We've got DARPA has a sonic projector that was reported on in 2007. But of course, it had been around for quite some time before then. Army has something they call voice to skull, We've got the Air Force using microwaves to create sounds at Brooks Air Force Base. We've got the Marine Corps with their Medusa project. We've got the State Department, as reported by the Washington Post in 2005, working on voices implanted in people's heads. We've got a couple of companies, one that has patented something called hypersound. That's American Technologies. Has also got Holosonic Research Labs, also has a patented version. So the military-industrial complex has been all over this. When you see something this wide, this is not just one little research project from one organization. And this is something that 5, 10 years ago, it was being reported on in even mainstream press like the Washington Post, and yet nobody knows about this.
Well, the people who follow the internet pretty closely, and certainly the victims of this technology, know about it. But you're right. There's been a lot of research done into how to put voices into one's head. It was found long ago that if you can put a voice into someone's head, you can do several things. If I put a voice that's foreign to your normal thought pattern in your head, that becomes harassment. And the harassment over time will make you display signs of schizophrenia. When you go and tell people that you're hearing voices, we've been patterned to turnkey see that as schizophrenia and not even look to see if there's a legitimate source for it. If I put a voice in your head that's in your voice, and if you pattern a thought, like I tell some of these victims, when you read a book, you're actually hearing your own voice in your head as you read. If I put that voice in your head, then that becomes a thought. Wow. And you'll act on those thoughts, and that's how they think that some of this is being used for subliminal control.
Wow. I know that in some of these articles I was reading on the mid-2000s, they were talking about how they were using it as the voice of God, as the voice of Allah, because they figured that there was something that they could use. They thought that the people that they were going against that were Muslims were very religious, superstitious. And
that was used in the field of battle. The voice of God weapon, which is actually called S-Quad, or Silent Sound Spread Spectrum, was used in the first Operation Desert Storm. That was one of those scenarios where 1,500 Iraqi soldiers disassembled their weapons, got to their knees, and surrendered to 150 Marines who didn't have enough slip ties to tie them all together, because, and this was admitted, that they used S-Quad to put the voice of Allah in their heads to tell them to surrender.
Wow.
Before that, in the mid to late 80s, 5 separate inmates from the Utah State Prison had written affidavits saying that they were put in solitary confinement and were experimented on with some type of electronic device that put voices in their head, and all of them claimed that they could tell the voices of the people doing the experimentation on them were responding back to their thoughts.
Wow.
So this has been going on for a while. Unfortunately, it's just not gotten any major media coverage until recently.
So they're basically setting themselves up as the ventriloquists, and we're the dummies or the zombies, right?
Well, it's like I've said in with other reporters and other shows, that guns and taxes won't control everybody.
Yeah.
Electromagnetic technology will.
Wow. Wow.
The unfortunate thing with this type of voice-to-skull or microwave auditory effect type hearing is that it's designed for only the target to hear. In 1996, the Army came out with their addendum to the biologic effects of non-lethal weapons, where they talk about the microwave auditory effect and how even with microphones in the ear canal or microphones attached to the scalp, that the voices can't be recorded. And they go on to say, imagine the incapacitating effect on an enemy combatant when they begin to hear voices in their own head. Another high-ranking military official said, we now have the ability to talk someone to death. So the bad thing is, once these victims tell their family members, tell their employer, tell their physician that they're hearing voices, well, I mean, in today's psychiatric community, if you're hearing voices your psychiatrist can't hear, then you're delusional or schizophrenic until proven otherwise. And unfortunately, the psychiatric community has not been educated on the fact that there is technology out here now that is meant to mimic mental illness.
Now, what do you mean by mind control? There's an awful lot of technologies involved in that.
Yes, of course, in the old days, it involved drugs, chemistry, torture, that kind of thing, and that actually continued on until the 1960s and 70s. Once we get into the late 80s, early 90s, mind control was developed through satellite transmission, so that you didn't have to be taken to a specific location to be programmed. You could be programmed eating lunch or sleeping or going about your daily business.
Similar to the film They Live.
Similar to that, yes.
So can you describe the techniques involved in these types of mind control?
Yes, and it was actually pre-Montauk project. Montauk was actually 1970 to 1983. But we have to thank the Germans during World War II for developing procedures that fractured the mind pattern of a human being through torture. They developed what is called psychic driving, where you bring a person to extremes, several hours or days of extreme cold and then extreme heat. You can give them starvation for several days and you overfeed them, make them sleep for days and then keep them awake. Fracture. The mind doesn't know what to expect. And then this was developed further by Dr. Ewan Cameron, who, after the war, brought the Nazi techniques to Canada, actually, in the late 1940s. He's a Dr. Ewan Cameron was a Scottish scientist who was very interested in this kind of work. And after the war, as people know now, in the U.S. it was Project Paperclip, where they would bring valuable Nazi scientists, doctors, etc., to the United States, Canada, UK, even to the Soviet Union, where they would continue their experiments, and they were saved from the Nuremberg trials, etc. And Dr. Ewan Cameron got the German information, and he started clinics in Montreal, in Ottawa, and Toronto, and he enveloped or enhanced the psychic driving. He started out in mental institutions, where he would have the subjects in a room where they would have a split board between their eyes. One side would see a flower blooming, another side would see an animal being ripped apart. In one ear would be classical music, and another ear would be loud, horrendous music.
Was it important which side saw what scene?
They would switch sides so that the left brain, which is the ego, physical reality-based side, and the right brain, the creative, emotional, spiritual side, would then be confused as to what to accept, and the mind would then fracture. And that's when programming was initiated in the mind pattern. They knew through the German experimentation that the most you could fracture a mind would create a geometric shape in the mind of a cube of 13 by 13 by 13, and that would lead to 2,197 compartments that could be programmed into subpersonalities, full personalities, specific functions, constructs, etc.
Think of Guantanamo Bay and the question of interrogating terrorists. We can now, in the future, be able to think about reading a terrorist's mind without using coercive tactics. Certain brain patterns correspond to certain thoughts, a dictionary of thinking.
Now, from the psychiatric community standpoint, at the very top of the psychiatric community, I mean, they know very well that this technology exists because the early studies on mind control through MKUltra and MKSearch and Bluebird were all headed up by psychiatrists. Many of these psychiatrists were tops in their fields. Ewan Cameron up at McGill University was the president of the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Jolly West out in California, same thing, one of the top people in his field. Now, does this knowledge trickle down to the community psychiatrist that you're going to be sent to in your hometown? Probably not. Matter of fact, some of the psychiatrists that I know that I've talked to don't even fully believe that MKUltra really happened. They've done, it's not taught in their schools. You know, certainly they're not going to teach them in residency that their profession was responsible for some of the most horrendous crimes ever known in this country. Yeah. So they're largely ignorant of the technology, and that's where it's really, you know, kind of our charge to educate the community psychiatrist anyway, that just because someone's hearing voices doesn't mean they're schizophrenic. They may actually be a victim of criminalization. So that's where we need to do a better job, probably educating them. Unfortunately, when you're another physician trying to tell a psychiatrist, fellow physician psychiatrist, that voices in somebody's head is technologic, you know, and not mental illness, then you're subject to getting a diagnosis as well. So,
civilian and military units shall be trained in containment and combat of classified, including irradiated classified with possibility of classified airborne, classified flesh-eating, classified and or all of the above in such event as classified spewing, classified escape.
Here's the publication number, the type, the application number. It was published, as you see, in 2000, and it was filed in 1998. And so it's been a couple of years that it's been out, because now we're in 2014. However, I can only imagine that the advancements that this has made since then, just something to think about. It lists the inventor and all this information in case you want to look at that. But let's just get into the nitty-gritty of this thing. Okay, here's what the patent's title is: Communication System and Method Including Brain Wave Analysis and or Use of Brain Activity. Now here's the abstract, the overall of what it is about. A system and method for enabling human beings to communicate by way of their monitored brain activity. The brain activity of an individual is monitored and transmitted to a remote location. At the remote location, the monitored brain activity is compared with pre-recorded normalized brain activity, curves, waveforms, or patterns to determine if a match or substantial match is found. If such a match is found, then the computer at the remote location determines that the individual was attempting to communicate the word, phrase, or thought corresponding to the match stored normalized signal. So basically what that is saying is this is a system by which brain activity of a human being is transported to a remote location. Now, obviously, there are good intentions and good reasons to have this, but as with most things, it can highly be abused, it can be misused, and it can be commercialized, especially by the elite. Who wouldn't want to get their hands on something like this, especially someone with a lot of money and a lot of power?
You know, for years, everyone has thought that the brain's too complex. That there's no way you'll ever control people. You do mind control. The brain's too complex to be controlled. And the fact is that it's just simply not. Especially when they started working with various frequencies, ELF waves and microwaves, it turns out that the brain is actually very easy to manipulate. And like you said, it goes back as far as the 60s and 70s. You see Malik's invention from 74 hit the brain with two dissimilar frequencies. It spits out an interference frequency. You can actually decode the EEG from that interference frequency. And it was initially invented as a way to watch pilots, so you would know when they fall asleep or when they start.
They just announced Toyota, you're going to turn your car on with a brainwave.
Exactly. And we've even got toys out now. 2 years ago, Mattel came out with a toy where you control a little ball rolling around on a bed of fans with your mind. And that's an ELF wave-based toy. It's ELF waves generated from your mind that you're controlling a ball remotely with. So, I mean, the technology is really not that far-fetched, and especially now when with Snowden's release and you see the NSA, you know, what all of us already knew, especially you and I, that, yeah, our cell phones and our text messages and our emails are being watched.
And the IRS is targeting libertarians and conservatives and harassing them and arresting them. They are authoritarians.
Yeah, so, I mean, when you look at that, it's not too far of a stretch to go, well, if you're going to watch everybody, then you have to exert some form of control. And, you know, if you look back at the research on it in the early studies, it started with MKUltra and targeting individuals. Then it seems like they went into group research type study. You see the People's Temple with Jim Jones. You see Heaven's Gate. A lot of people allege that...
Oh, Jim Jones was CIA. That came out.
Exactly. And that the CIA actually creates these cult groups so they have a captive population.
Well, that's their front.
Yeah, to test this kind of type of technology and mind control on a group. Well, now the group is society. They know they can work it in a small group. They know they can control an individual. Now they need to control society and the world at large.
You know, the psychiatric community has been trying to mainstream, you know, mental illness for a long time. You know, you've seen the commercials for all the various antidepressants where,
yes,
you know, they're trying to say, you know, hey, it's okay to have a mental problem. You can be on antidepressants or Seroquel, and it's okay. You know, you're still going to function, and society's still going to love you. Unfortunately, that's not the truth. Once you're diagnosed as delusional or psychotic or schizophrenic, you know, for voicing these complaints, really your life starts to spiral downhill after that, because your employer usually doesn't want to keep you hired on if you seem to be mentally dysfunctional or have been diagnosed as mentally dysfunctional. Your family members will treat you differently, pretty much ostracized after that. And then that just adds to the problem that in your heart of hearts you know you're a victim, but no one else believes you. And then that tends to lead to behavior that even makes you look even more crazy as you try to convince everybody around you that it really is happening. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And once you reach that point, it's pretty hard to get back.
President Lyndon B. Johnson had on his board of science advisors geophysicist J.F. McDonald, who wrote, quote, "One could develop a system that would seriously impair the brain performance of very large populations in selected regions over an extended period." The CIA's program in experimental mind control became known as MK Ultra.
MK Ultra was a government program to see whether through various different techniques people could be made to do things which they wouldn't normally do.
During the 1960s and 1970s, Dr. Andrija Puharich studied the impact ELF waves have on the brain. What he discovered was shocking. Dr. Puharich found that a 6.6 Hertz ELF wave could cause depression. A 7.83 Hertz ELF wave made a person feel good, producing an altered state. And a 10.80 Hertz ELF wave could trigger riotous behavior.
One of the reasons we think it's probably multimodal, it's probably coming from a combination of ground sources, satellite, and HARP. You know, we've taken victims out onto desolate ranches here in Texas where we know there's no cell coverage, there's no power lines, there's very little electromagnetic pollution, and they still hear voices and they still get attacked. You know, we've had people go from this country to another country and get attacked while they're on the plane. Taking people on boats into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, they still get attacked. That part of it leads me to believe that a lot of it is satellite-based because it can track you anywhere. And many victims will tell you, well, I left California to the Midwest thinking I would get away from it. And they get away from the stalking for a little while until, you know, they're handed over to another perpetrator group, but they don't get away from the attacks. Just worldwide experimentation. The technology is meant to control you. With the random sample of people that it seems to be targeting and the fact that it's happening globally, and all of these people have virtually identical complaints.
You feel sleepy and relaxed. So relaxed. You trust me and what I say. The government love you. The government cares for you. Watch the television. This is the truth. Criminals and terrorists want to kill you. The government will save you. The police will save you. We need to go to war to protect you. We are here to look after you. Conspiracy theorists are insane and dangerous. Be fearful. We're small and weak. The government is strong. We will look after you. Obey. You must obey. Do not challenge authority. You are bad. Humans are bad. You must work hard. To survive, you must have more money. You must be better than him and her. You are separate and alone. Other people want to hurt you and take what is yours. You must always respect authority.
Cheryl Welch maintains that the U.S. government is testing mind control on unknowing victims.
Well, basically, this is I'm networking on the internet, and this is a worldwide international problem. The International Red Cross has a 1990 article which discusses the fact that many major superpowers, many industrialized countries, are researching electromagnetic technology for anti-personnel uses, and the technology is highly classified.
Cheryl believes that she and others are the victims of this mind control research.
Many of the victims that I network with describe hearing voices and microwave illness, where they have headaches, just generally sleep disturbances, sunburns even though it's at night, just microwave effects.
Microwaves and other radio frequencies are known to affect the human body. But could they be responsible for voices in people's heads? In Chicago, Illinois, a world authority on microwave hearing shows how it could work.
I'm hearing a microwave pulse like a click. Now it sounds like a chirp with a tonal quality to it.
Professor James Lynn is hearing sounds that aren't there. But he's not crazy. Pulses of microwave energy are being generated and fired at him from behind.
Microwaves can be heard depending on the individual, depending on the hearing acuity of the individual. Individuals with fairly normal hearing can hear microwaves at quite a low level.
Voices. That's how they get you. The spooks have developed a technology called synthetic telepathy. They beam a frequency at you and let your skeleton conduct the voices like an antenna. Sounds like ghosts inside of you. They've targeted individuals for experimentation.
The energy of the absorbed microwaves causes brain tissue to very slightly heat up and expand, causing a pressure wave to be picked up by the hearing mechanism in the inner ear. Professor Lynn is far from hearing voices, but it could be possible to send coded signals to an agent this way.
Brain is an electrical organ. It is susceptible to electrical signals. Since microwave is electrical, therefore, in principle, one could embed or encode information in the microwave signal such that it could be perceived by the brain.
That there would be a national security force, and every town would have blimps, even small ones over it, that were solar powered during the day, and that then you would have microwaves to spy on people for their safety, of course, and all the rest of this, and how ground-penetrating radar to look through your walls, and now they're launching all this.
And it's all designed for control.
Well, I'm just saying they can put a lot more cheaply on these.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, you know, the satellite, you know, we're launching reconnaissance satellites and surveillance satellites, you know, every couple of weeks. There's a ton of them up there. And I know when I talk to the victims, they say, well, is it one or two or three? It's thousands of reconnaissance satellites that are up there. And the other question that a lot of victims will get is, well, how is somebody spending this kind of money to follow you, to watch you all the time? And actually, most investigators will tell you satellite surveillance is the cheapest way, you know, to track somebody. The satellites are already up there. Our tax dollars launched them.
Sure, but I'm just saying launching more of them, they're going towards blimps.
Yeah.
You can put them at 100,000 feet, people hardly see them, and they can just have huge arrays on the bottom.
Yeah, and like you said, they're solar powered. You know, they're powered forever.
It's amazing.
There
is that it's an extremely low frequency, and it keeps the inner ears, the bones, vibrating at a very high rate, and you get that humming or buzzing sound in there.
That's right. And if it's in the left ear, it's physical, right? It's coming from a physical source.
Yes.
And if it's in the right ear, it's coming from a non-physical source.
Correct. That's right.
Would that be from the astral level?
Yeah, because the government does use technology in the lower astral levels that can affect the physical. And of course, it's much easier to deal with things from that level because it's undetectable and very easily can be manipulated.
We're dealing with a form of technology where you can no longer trust your senses. You can't trust what your eyes see. You can't trust what your ears hear. And more than that, you can't trust what you really believe to be true or false.
HAARP is a bank of 180 antennas, each as tall as a 7-story building, erected near Gakona, Alaska. The antennas emit extremely low-frequency waves, also known as ELF waves, into the upper atmosphere.
You'd have a signal that would hit the ionosphere, begin to pulse the energy into the ionosphere, and the ionosphere, this layer, would begin to pulse back. So it changes it from a direct current to an alternating current, sending back to the Earth in the ELF range, extremely low frequency range of 1 to 20 hertz. Those same frequencies, 1 to 20 hertz, happen to correlate with predominant brain frequencies in human beings.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the False Memory Foundation. There's actually a foundation that's made up of mostly researchers and psychiatrists. It's called the False Memory Foundation, and they specifically disagree with the fact that any technology that people are complaining about that gives them false memories of experimentation, they're saying that that's all memories being intentionally implanted by psychotherapists and not from experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Michael Persinger, who's done a lot of this research with microwave energy, is a member of the False Memory Foundation.
If you go back to the work of Gordon J.F. MacDonald in the 1970s, you'll find that he was talking about being able to modulate a signal into the ionosphere that would be able to return a signal that the human body would couple with, would lock onto, and begin to follow in a manner that would change the emotional state of people over a large geographic area.
Does HAARP fulfill MacDonald's prophecy? Has the day of mass mind control arrived?
Fearful. You do not like music. You do not like people who smoke. You do not like people who try to tell you things that are bad about your government. These people are dangerous. They are not to be trusted. Take your vaccine, or swine flu will kill you. We care. You must buy our products, pay your taxes, and watch the television. Do not question authority. Keep fighting each other. Do not question. Violence in films is sexy and exciting. Sex with strangers behind your partner's back is exciting. Your partner is boring. Your partner is cheating on you, does not love you. You are worthless and not worthy of being loved at all.
The Russian Mind Control Program, Controlled Offensive Behavior, USSR, is a 1972 U.S. Army study of Soviet mind control experimentation. The Russian directed energy weapons program focused on targeting of individuals, not groups. Soviet dissidents were the target of microwave anti-personnel weapons and mind-altering techniques that sought, quote, the total submission of one's will to some outside force. Electromagnetic weapon mind control surfaced in the 1973 Russian Conference on Psychotronic Research. The agenda for the Prague meeting included the following 5 topics: erasure of the subconscious mind, development of ESP, induction of paranormal effects in dreams, the mechanical equivalent of neuropsychic energy, and the psi gene. The Soviets were known to have potent blinding lasers. They were also feared to have developed acoustic and radio wave weapons. A 1987 issue of Soviet Military Power, a Cold War Pentagon publication, warned that the Soviets might be close to, quote, a prototype short-range tactical radio frequency weapon. The Washington Post reported that year that the Soviets had used such weapons to kill goats at 1 kilometer's range.
Under so-called normal circumstances, the human mind is under operation of a core personality. And the core personality will function in an intact manner during daily life, etc. However, when trauma and extremes are introduced simultaneously, the mind cannot handle the overload of input, and so it starts to dissociate. In fact, very often the personality will actually leave the body to a degree so that it doesn't have to experience the pain and trauma that is being inflicted upon it. And so the mind then starts to compartmentalize so that a portion of the mind will handle what's being done, while another portion of the mind is distracting the consciousness or the personality from the trauma. And if this is done repetitively, then both the distraction and the awareness start to fracture because they can't handle the overload.
It is another objective of this invention to provide a system capable of identifying particular nodes in an individual's brain, the fringes of which affect characteristics such as appetite, hunger, thirst, communication skills. Nodes in general are utilized to communicate certain words such as yes and no, or even phrases, I don't know, I'm not sure, or numbers 1 to 10, 100, and the like. Thought processes, depression, and the like. When such nodes are identified, they may be specifically monitored by one or more sensors to analyze behavior or communication or words, phrases, or thoughts. In other embodiments, devices mounted to the person, and get this, underneath the scalp, may be energized in a predetermined manner or sequence to remotely cause particular identified brain nodes to be fired in order to cause, get that, cause a predetermined feeling or reaction in the individual, such as a lack of hunger, lack of depression, lack of thirst, lack of aggression, lack of Alzheimer's disease effects, or the like. I don't know about you, but to me this sounds like an utter nightmare. I mean, literally a nightmare. I mean, they have the ability to control and know what you're thinking, and for the elite out there to have that information. This isn't a, I mean, check this out. Analyzing behavior, and it's linked with depression. And get this, in order, these little sensors, these little brain nodes are fired in order to what? Cause a predetermined feeling or reaction. Cause, which makes you feel a certain way, makes you react a certain way. And what do they list as examples? Makes you have a lack of hunger, lack of depression, lack of thirst, lack of aggression, lack of Alzheimer's. You know, there's a little bit of good in with a lot of bad. And this is just a freaky thing.
And I always use the analogy that thoughts are film, the brain is the projector, and physical reality is the screen. And so if you don't like the movie that's playing, you change the film, which is the way you think. However, the film can be replaced artificially through this programming process. And that's what the Illuminati powers that be do in order to download certain softwares into the mind so that certain functions via triggers are accessible.
Could you explain those terms?
Well, there is a difference between programming and mind control, and I know a lot of people use them synonymously. Programming is the actual software that's installed with the foundations of all the functions and alters. Mind control is the operation of that programming. And that is also different than brainwashing. Brainwashing happens every day. Your parents can brainwash you, school, politics, religion especially, and that's just telling you something over and over again till you believe it. But the programming and mind control is an embedded pattern that actually hooks onto your foundational mind patterns and is an overlay. And so you think that it's your own thought when actually it's been artificially introduced.
According to this article in the Washington Post magazine, in 1994, the Air Force Research Laboratory carried out experiments where scientists used technology to transmit phrases into the heads of human subjects. How? By burying subliminal messages in microwaves and beaming them into a person's head. The Air Force denies it's working on one. But patent number 6470214, issued on October 22, 2002, says otherwise. The patent title, Method and Device for Implementing the Radio Frequency Hearing Effect.
The agenda behind those?
The agenda behind all of this is to create a society that is robotical, very similar to what you see on the Borg in Star Trek. You know, you report to a computer system, you don't question anything, you don't deviate from your functions, you do what you're told, and there is no independent thinking to do otherwise. The part that is important is that to the Illuminati, this is a form of their society, this is their culture, and they do this to ensure that the culture does not deviate from its agenda through eons of time.
That it's time now that people in America and all over the world become more aware of the many thousands, if not larger numbers of victims of people that have been used in mind control experimentation, and as well as being used within our own government and other governments as operatives that have been under mind control, used as a slave labor force without their own knowledge or awareness.
One scary possibility that we would have to guard against is that is it possible that hackers of the future could somehow manage to peek inside our own heads?
There may be reason to be concerned.
No, electronic harassment as a whole with this surveillance, is electronic surveillance, turns the target, like myself, into a walking, talking piece of surveillance equipment. They have the ability to see through my eyes in real time, hear through my ears, everything that's said.
It's interesting because it would be almost the perfect way to implement something known as man-machine interface. If you can simulate the brain, you can simulate vision, you can simulate auditory cortex, you can simulate movement, you can stimulate the passions, you can stimulate desires, you can basically address your brain directly.
Many observers would say that normal humans have inventive creativity. They have art. They have a whole pile of new things in their minds. It would infer that by some other group of people demanding a hive mind or a Borg mind or a cyborg mind or something that is totally controlled, that they are maybe different to other people here.
You know, everybody has the same potential. And as far as a hive mind is concerned, yes, that is exactly what they would like. A ruler, the queen bee or whoever it happens to be, sends out or transmits a signal to the worker bees, the slaves, who carry out that signal or order. And that is what the Illuminati wish. Remember, we're on a planet of over 7.5 billion people. The Illuminati, Committee of 300, all the control systems, if you add them up, it's only a few 100,000 people. And that might sound like a lot, but in comparison to billions, it's minute. And so armies and weapons are not enough. The population could overwhelm that small minority. And so the most logical thing that they can do is mind control the population.
What HAARP is doing is creating a shield in the ionosphere over the Earth and trying to create weather manipulation so that we think there's such things as global warming when in fact it's just a manipulation of our weather and geological events as well.
Let me ask you about the success of Montauk. Do you know if they accomplished anything that was just truly extraordinary?
Well, I think that they did accomplish their goal, and right now, 100% of the Earth is affected by mind control or scalar waves that are transmitted now from satellites in space that completely ring the Earth and are enhanced by ground antenna that we see as cell tower microwave transmissions, so that at any moment they can transmit a mind control wave to specific areas of the Earth, to specific people. And a lot of what's happening now with the chemtrails is also creating a web or a network around the Earth, like a shield or radio wiring, so that it's like a grid that covers the Earth, and they can pinpoint very specific locations now and transmit whatever they wish to create.
Brain node fringes are the basis of thought and mind processes of individuals. Certain embodiments of this invention enable such brain fringes and behavior to be captured by an external device. So something can read your brain and keep that information. It is an object of this invention to utilize a normalization of normalizing curve or waveform or pattern based upon monitored brain activity to detect or determine thought process by the monitored individual. In such a manner, individuals can transmit by satellite what they are thinking or intending to think via their monitored brain activity without the need to talk or write down the information. Telepathic kind of stuff, if you will. Okay, then it goes on. Each individual has a distinct pattern of brain node fringes or brain activity. Each person is believed to be different in this regard, and this is creepy. Thus, a separate brain activity file may be stored in a memory for each individual. So they can store information on every one of us on our brain activity. If the NSA spying on Facebook, through your cars, through your, through your electronical devices, through your washing machine, if it isn't enough that NASA's already or the NSA, sorry, not NASA, bleep there, but if the NSA is already spying on everything that you do, why do they need to go as far as to know what we're thinking? If you think it's bad now, it's about to get a heck of a lot worse.
I've heard from victims from Norway, from Sweden, from China, from Italy, from Germany, from India, from Yemen, just about everywhere. This is a global thing. The eventual intent will be to control the world population with.
Bond says he's found more than 300 victims locally and is tracking others across the state through billboards. In Johnson Valley, a Freedom House just opened to help people who believe they are being targeted.
To many of you who find yourselves the object of covert harassment, that there is hope and that you are not alone, and that we are striving to find legislation and we're working towards freedom for all.
Jarek Robinson leads a national group called Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. He says he knows who's playing mind games.
Rogue government officials that are sponsoring this, also corrupt business officials, and private citizens.
And he also told us how.
Most of it is delivered by microwave, and I believe it's satellite delivered, whether someone is on a remote location using a laptop.
My hope is that people will wake up and realize that things are not the way they should be, that they need to take control of their own mind. I don't believe in physical revolution or physical violence. The war has to be in here. You have to take control of your brain, of your mind pattern, of your emotions, and do release work that will undermine the mind patterns of the programming and then release what's hooked on to those mind patterns and access your core personality, reintegrate who and what you are, sew those compartmentalized pieces of the mind back together so that we can have the society we're supposed to have. Why does this happen? Because, as I said before, we project out what's in our mind patterns and the world reflects it back. So humanity as a species has a victimization mind pattern. When you have a victimization mind pattern, you attract tyrants and oppressors. And so, what we see, it's really, we must take responsibility. You can't blame the Illuminati or the aliens. They are here because we're allowing them to be here. If we change the way we think, change the film, project out something else, then they will have no power over us. It could happen tomorrow if everybody would wake up and do it. Is that likely? No. Will it eventually happen? I believe so. I think that humanity will be backed against a corner to the point where they'll say, hey, we've had enough and we're going to do something about this. The Illuminati, the mind control, the programming, all of this, they want you to think that you're disconnected from the source, from the God mind. But that can never be. They can only make you have an illusion that that is so. But in actuality, you can never be disconnected from Creator. And so it's my hope to teach people how to take that part of them, the creative part, and extrapolate that into their lives and project that out so all of this will go away.
Okay, how do people wake up?
This is what I teach in my work. I teach people how to balance the left and right hemisphere of the brain, how to work with their energy systems, how to deprogram, how to connect to their higher intelligence that's within them. I teach them color therapy, alternative healing, how to eat, how to exercise, basically how to be a human being. And so that's what I teach. And again, it's up to each individual to do this or not do this, their choice.
You know, the bad thing about someone being able to hear your thoughts in real time, which is the way this technology works, is the social ramifications it's going to have will be far greater than probably the good that it can do. Once people realize that the government not only can watch you inside your house, can attack you for behavior they don't agree with, and hear your thoughts, well, there's a lot of, psychosocial implications of that, especially, among the religious. When you pray, or, it's not God hearing your prayers, it's the government, and that's going to be disconcerting to a lot of people.
The first thing is that, and I tell this in all my classes, that there's nothing to fear. You are always loved. You can do nothing wrong. And when I say that, it's not that you should murder people. It's that whatever does happen, there's a reason for it and a lesson to learn from it. And that you must take control of your own mind so no one else takes control of your mind. And research who and what you are. What are your origins? Where did your family come from? And I encourage you to go to the sources, not to read in books or on the internet, but go to where you originated and go from that source back, because that's where the information is. And to be kind to each other. You must be kind to each other. Get rid of the anger. Get rid of the hostility. There's no reason to fight. Now is the time to unify, but for the right reasons.
I don't know how much you believe about global warming. My personal belief is that it's been fairly well debunked when they caught the scientists trying to lie about their results on temperature changes. That was probably going to be the initial global boogeyman. The general public always needs a boogeyman to be scared of, to wrap them into control. We had 9/11, therefore we had the Patriot Act. We needed to surrender our civil liberties for our safety. Well, for the UN to have a global government, they'll need a global boogeyman. And the global warming thing kind of got debunked. If you've noticed, there's more and more coming out in the news now about aliens, alien contact. The UN has appointed a delegate for when there's alien contact. Even Fox News, one of the most conservative news channels, is doing stories about alien contact on occasion now that 5-10 years ago you've never seen on Fox News. That's all part of conditioning to eventually that the Project Bluebeam, alien contact will be what gives us the feeling that we need a global government to combat the alien invasion. And I can foresee that happening here relatively quickly in the future.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, "Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space." And I said, teachers don't stop until June. He said, "No, you have to understand. This is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies," he said, "against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids." And then he would repeat to me over and over, "And the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat." Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies. This is a system, he told me, that would never protect anyone. Even back then, he talked about suitcase bombs. He talked about chemical, viral, bacterial, biological warfare, that these space-based weapons would never protect us against. And then he told me that, in fact, if you travel around the world, which I did after he died in 1977, I met with people in over 100 countries who were friends. They didn't want to build space-based weapons. I became a space and missile defense consultant And I worked with people around the world. I became an advisor to the People's Republic of China. They don't want to build a space-based weapon system. And he told me back then that they didn't. He said, go to Russia. They're considered to be the enemy. I got on a plane by myself. When I got to Russia, I had a list of people that I had read out of the newspaper. Chernenko was in office then. He was the only one I didn't get a chance to meet. They introduced me to everyone when I got there. And when I got back, I said, oh my Lord, this man is telling the truth. There is no threat. And I've been waiting until this day for 27 years. And I'm expecting the spin to happen, because he also explained to me that as a military strategist, as a person who worked on the MX missile, which I did later, he said, you will find that there is going to be a spin to find some enemy against whom we have to build space-based weapons. And now we should expect the spin, because he said part of the formula for the intelligence community is if they might have a weapon, then we have to consider that they do have these weapons. So now they do have these weapons, so now we have to build these weapon systems. And that's the formula, except that it's all based on a lie. And we have witnesses here today that have shown you that these extraterrestrial beings, that these craft that have come here are now not UFOs, they're identified flying objects. And we know that they have beings in them. And we have witnesses here who have told you that they can shut down our missile silos. They can stop a rocket going into space that's a test. We have witnesses here who have worked in the classified departments, who have the courage to come forward here to support what Wernher von Braun told me back in 1974 to 77. And I will testify before the Congress that when I founded the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space, which I shut down a few years ago because I didn't believe we had a chance with this huge, integrated around the world, complex weapon system, that we had any chance at all of transforming that war industry into a space industry that could provide benefits, like Dr. Greer has said, of global warming. We can end that situation of that problem. We can end the energy crisis. We can build now non-polluting technologies. Wernher von Braun used to tell me that we could have cars back then that drove around off the ground. He described this to me on beams so that we have no pollution on this planet. And we can solve the problems of the people that are urgent and potential, and the other animals and the other cultures on Earth and in space. And we can end the arms race without dislocating the industry jobs, without disrupting the economy, by transforming, Wernher von Braun told me, the war industry into a global cooperative space industry that will provide, he said, finally, more jobs and profits on this planet than during any hot or cold wartime, more products and services that can be applied directly to solving the problems of this planet. And we can have a whole planet now that lives in peace on Earth, with all the cultures on Earth and with all the extraterrestrial cultures in space. And these are words that Wernher von Braun told me in 1974, and I will testify before the Congress under oath about everything I have said and more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just as music from the radio is a physical manifestation of an intangible signal, our experience of emotion is the physical manifestation of an intangible signal as well. It has been shown that our emotions have a vibratory frequency to them. Furthermore, there are only two emotions that humankind experiences: fear and love. All other emotions branch either directly or indirectly from these two emotions. Fear has a long and slow frequency vibration to it, while love has a very rapid and high frequency. To show that vibration is the very foundation of existence, Hans Jene developed what is known as cymatics in the 1940s to show that when vibrations of sound are passed through a form of media, there is a set pattern that will follow. When the frequency increases, the media develops into a more complex pattern. This is precisely what is happening to our Earth and to humanity. There are 64 possible codes of amino acids in our DNA structure made from 4 elements: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. By any means of logic, we should have all 64 codes activated within our DNA structure. Yet we presently only have 20 active codes.
And of these 64 possibilities, it appears that only 20 of these codes are turned on right now for us, the 20 amino acids. There is a switch that turns off and turns on where those coding sites lie, and that the switch for that turning off and turning on is what we call emotion. And this is the first time that we've ever seen the patterns of emotion directly physically linked to human genetic material. Well, fear is a long, slow wave of emotion. So this wave of fear is a long, slow wave and touches relatively few sites on this DNA. So an individual living in fear is limited to the number of antennae that they have available to them, whereas an individual living in the pattern of love, this is love in DNA. You can see it's a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. We have many more potential sites for coding along that genetic pattern. This information, this is amazing. This is the first time we've ever had a hard digital link between emotion and genetics.
This is important to understand because another researcher named Vladimir Popanov measured tiny particles of light called photons inside a vacuum tube. The photons were scattered as expected. A sample of DNA was then entered into the vacuum tube and they measured the photons again. They found that the particles of light aligned themselves along the axis of the DNA. Then, as they removed the DNA sample, the photons remained aligned to the same form of the DNA, even though no DNA was present. This is what is known as the phantom DNA experiment. Science has now bridged a very important gap between physical and ethereal, or spiritual. Our emotions directly affect the structure of our DNA, which directly shapes the physical world we experience every day.
Yeah. You know, we've just got to not let fear get to us, because that's the control system's most potent weapon. Well, I think that, you know, the spraying from the air, I mean, I've been to 50 countries over the last 20 years, and even when I visit my friend Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman in South Africa near the Kalahari Desert, you look up in the sky and the bloody chemtrails are there. They're everywhere. And there's obviously a reason for that. And one of the things I've learned over this 20 years of research is that there's never one reason for anything. There are multiple reasons. Part of it is destabilizing the human immune system. Part of it is creating a sub-reality around the planet to manipulate the energetic field that we're living in every day. And I'm absolutely convinced that the chemtrails and the manipulation of the lower levels of the energetic field, Earth's energetic field, which we live in and experience all the time, is connected in part to the HARP transmissions, which, of course, HARP has many multiple levels of technology and applications, and one of them is literally creating mass fields of thought, which we decode as our own. I had a friend in America who told me a few weeks ago that she, her husband, her son and a son's partner had exactly the same dream about Barack Obama in the same night, which was a dream saying that he was a good guy and a wonderful guy and all the rest of it, which you know, a day's research will show you is a nonsense. But and she said immediately that she felt that some kind of technology had been broadcast and people had picked it up. What they're seeking to access is the pineal gland to literally transmit thought, perceptions, dreams into your reality. We need to be aware of this, because not every dream is a premonition of oh, you know, all the rest of it. They can be broadcast out, and we can decode them and thinking it's a dream we're having when it's actually something we're picking up. And that's what part of the HARP system is.
love that you withhold is the pain that you carry. That's been the most memorable one, only because of what that particular statement entails. When we leave our physical form, and what many of the Catholicisms teach, you're judged by God. It just simply isn't true. We judge ourselves. And what I read in that statement is that when we cross over, we look at the places in our life where we withheld love, that we maybe didn't give enough. And we judge ourselves on that. The love that you withhold is the pain that you carry.
This is the difference between the power of our Creator and anything else, particularly evil. That you can go into a pitch black room full of evil, full of darkness, and light a little candle, and instantly that darkness flees. But you can't do the opposite. You can't go into a well-lit room full of truth and wisdom and righteousness and joy and health and harmony with the universal power. You can't take any amount of darkness and go into that well-lit room and have any effect whatsoever. That is the metaphor which I frequently think of when I think that I'm not empowered. It is the greatest lesson for me, and I think for everybody else, to know that we're on the winning side and that we win in the end.
What we need to do is to make people aware that they are eternal light, they are eternal energy, they cannot die, and the whole world's and our individuals' development to higher realms is the goal. And that's it. And the extreme final goal is the universal love, where we are all one, like a droplet in the ocean. And the droplet in the ocean today doesn't necessarily know that it is part of the ocean. Like we don't know, as human beings in a vehicle of the body, that we are all one in the energy. And that's it. We are all one.
If you guys are like me, you are probably fascinated with the subject of mind control, or mind, as I prefer to call them, mind manipulation technologies. And there is a very, very interesting story. And the reason I'm talking about this on today's News and Views is there is a very interesting article by Alberto Pena on Yahoo about what's happening in Chile. And the article drops a few tidbits that turn out to be bombshells, all right? So I want to bring this article to your attention. I'll link it when this posts. But the context here is, if you've been following the mind manipulation technology story, this goes all the way back to the Yale psychologist, Dr. Jose Delgado, back in the 50s and 60s, who wrote a book, The Psychic Control of America. And it's quite revealing about what Dr. Delgado wanted to do. And perfect technocrat, he basically wanted to control everybody right down to their thoughts. But the reason I'm talking about this is, in recent years, we've seen evidence of some sort of remote control, mind manipulation technology. More recently in Havana, Cuba, with the attacks on the American and Canadian embassy personnel. But in the last few weeks, we've been hearing stories about people in Washington, D.C., apparently being subject to similar types of technology. They're experiencing headaches, they're hearing strange sounds, and so on and so forth. And they're a bit disoriented. So I want to read several paragraphs from Mr. Pena's article here, and I want you to listen very closely, because the article contains a lot of admissions for people that don't believe that such technology is either possible or that exists. And there's something in this article that suggests to me the technologies that I talked about in my book, Microcosm and Medium. This is a Lulu book. And I want to mention one of those technologies in particular in conjunction with this article once we get through it. All right. So this article appeared on April 29th, which is not too far ago, on Yahoo. And the title of the article is Mind-Blowing: Advances in Brain Tech Spur Push for Neuro Rights. And here we go. Quote, as a sci-fi thriller, Inception topped box offices around the world. Audiences were delighted and appalled by its futuristic story of a criminal gang invading people's dreams to steal valuable data. More than a decade on, the technology envisioned by filmmaker Christopher Nolan is likely not far off, according to experts in Chile, who have moved the security debate beyond burglar alarms to safeguarding the most valuable real estate people ever own, their minds. The South American nation is aiming to be the world's first to legally protect citizens' neuro rights, with lawmakers expected to pass a constitutional reform blocking technology that seeks to, quote, increase, diminish, or disturb, unquote, people's mental integrity without their consent. Opposition Senator Guido Girardi, one of the authors of the legislation, is worried about technology, whether algorithms, bionic implants, or some other gadgetry that could threaten, quote, the essence of humans, their autonomy, their freedom, and their free will, unquote. If this technology manages to read your mind before you're even aware of what you're thinking, he told AFP, it could write emotions into your brain, life stories that aren't yours, and that your brain won't be able to distinguish whether they were yours or the product of designers, unquote. Skipping a bit now. In 2013, then U.S. President Barack Obama promoted the Brain Research Through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies initiative, which aimed to study the causes of brain disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and epilepsy. Back in Chile, Science Minister Andrés Cuvé told the AFP the neuro rights debate, quote, is part of a consolidation of new scientific institutionality in the country that is now capturing international attention, unquote. But many are worried about the potential for nefarious actors to abuse technological advances. Really? Chile's President Sebastián Piñera proposed at last week's Ibero-American Summit in Andorra that countries legislate together on the thorny issue. Quote, I call on all Ibero-American countries to anticipate the future and to adequately protect now, not just our citizens' data and information, but also their thoughts, their feelings, their neuronal information, and to prevent these from being manipulated by new technologies, unquote, the conservative Piñera said. The Chilean bill contains four main fields of legislation: guarding the human mind's data, or neurodata, fixing limits to the neurotechnology of reading and especially writing in brains. Latch onto that one, folks. That's huge. Setting an equitable distribution and access to these technologies. In other words, make them public. And putting limits on neuroalgorithms. Spanish scientist Rafael Yuste, an expert on the subject from Columbia University in New York, told AFP that some of these technologies already exist. Now, let me repeat that. We just had, oh boy, here, the mail runs right now during my news and viz. It's okay, little girl. That's the Canine Home Security Unit. No, you go lay down. You go lay down. I hear the mail. So we have the bill in Chile talking about equitable distribution and reading and writing technologies. That's the crucial point. And then we have the Columbia experts saying these technologies already exist, all right? So do the math here of what is really being said in the article. Now let me skip a couple paragraphs and give you three more outtakes from this article. If you can enter there, this is Yuste, the Columbian expert, or Columbia University expert, if you can enter there into the chemical process of the brain and stimulate or inhibit them, you can change people's decisions. This is something we've already done with animals, unquote, said Yuste. The risk is that without proper safeguards, the technology might be used to alter people's thoughts, employing algorithms via the internet. In other words, this, folks, that is a huge tell, because they just admitted something I've been saying for years, that any electrical circuitry, including the circuitry in your home, including your computer, can be used as a broadcast mechanism if you know how to do it, all right? And what they're really saying here is they can manipulate subtly algorithms on your computer to influence your mind, all right? Now let me get back to this. The risk is that without proper safeguards, the technology might be used to alter people's thoughts, employing algorithms via the internet to reprogram their hard wiring to dictate their interests, preferences, or patterns of consumption. Skipping another paragraph. Neurotechnology can be scary if you think about dystopian science fiction scenarios. However, for every dystopian scenario, there are 10 beneficial ones, said Yuste, who sees neurotechnology as a new renaissance for humanity, unquote. So, folks, what this article is, and the reason I'm bringing it to your attention today, is basically it's an admission now at an official national level, coming from Chile, that number one, the technology exists. Number two, it's a read-write technology. In other words, they can read your brain and they can write information into it depending on manipulation of algorithms and so on and so forth. Now, let me go back to my book here for a moment. That's Microcosm and Medium I'm talking about. Let me go back to that book for a moment. Because in that book, I pointed out that mind manipulation technology comes in all sorts of disguises and guises, from advertising, from art, from music, to the hard technology of actually using microwave interferometry to modulate information onto a broadcast beam and use that to manipulate a person's brain, all right? And I pointed out in that book something very interesting. Remember, this is not only a write technology, it's a read technology. In that book, I pointed out that back in the 1970s, the people involved in the American mind control projects were constructing what I was calling an electroencephalographic dictionary, that they would read words to people and record their electroencephalograms and notice the brainwave patterns associated with particular words, okay? And once they had done this with a number of people, they could begin to recognize the patterns, the brainwave patterns associated with particular words. So in other words, they compiled in the 1970s a small dictionary of brainwave patterns of particular words, all right? Now, that's the 1970s, and the number of entries in that dictionary was a couple of thousand. But in the book, I detail information that indicates that they had expanded those electroencephalographic dictionaries to about 70,000. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because I think that very concept is really at the heart of what they're talking about in this article. Because once you know those patterns, you can modulate those patterns onto a microwave beam that you're projecting at someone's mind and actually inject interior conversations. And there are people who have claimed that this has been done to them. You can also modulate information to cause people to hear sounds. You can cause them to have brain or neurological dysfunction and so on. You can literally remotely alter their emotions. Now, that in itself is fascinating, but what's also very suggestive here in this article, and you know, when I read this thing, folks, my jaw was just on the floor, because obviously whoever is behind this in Chile, up to and including the president of Chile himself, whoever is doing this are very, very, in my opinion, well informed as to what the capabilities actually are. So the other thing that falls out, you'll recall, is that they want to, as the article puts it, setting an extra equitable distribution and access to these technologies. So in other words, what they are trying to do is not only bring the technologies out, but they're also signaling in a very subtle way that it's now time to start developing technologies to defend against these types of things. And you can do that, it can be done, but what I'm suggesting here is in the next 10 years, I'm just making one of my typical off the end of the twig high-octane speculations here. But I suspect in the next 10 years that you're going to see beginning to appear on the public market claims or technologies that claim to protect you from precisely this type of mental, neural, and neurophysiological influence. So brace yourselves, folks. The mind manipulation era is official. It's here. And eventually what we're going to see is we're going to see a public response to it and a new growth industry, to put it that way.
The Battle for Your Brain, Psychological Warfare, by Viorel Serb. The owners of this planet are developing weapons to spy, exploit, steal from us, and kill us. What is gang stalking?
Actually free. It is called the Sentient World Simulation. The program's aim, according to its creator, is to be a continuously running, continually updated mirror model of the entire planet, complete with billions of nodes representing every person on the Earth.
And what people have to realize is that these targeted individuals are basically the test stage for rolling all of this madness out to all 7 billion of us on this planet.
The victims of this program are in 2 categories. 1. Targeted individuals, people who know about the program and know that they are victims of this program. 2. And those who don't know it. This includes the following: 80 to 90% of the schizophrenics, at least 70% of those who commit suicide, a very large part of the homeless people, a large number of drug addicts, many incarcerated, who committed a crime by being mind-controlled to do so, many locked up in mental institutions, and for those diagnosed with all sorts of mental illnesses.
It can literally stop your own thoughts from happening and replace them with other thoughts by sending thoughts to your head. And it's so sophisticated that you cannot tell where these thoughts are coming from. There's no way to discern that they're coming from somewhere other than your own mind. So if I didn't know I was under the influence of this technology, then I would have no idea that anyone was influencing my thoughts. And that's exactly how they manipulate someone's thoughts. They send voices into someone's head. They manipulate their emotions. They manipulate their behavior. And then that's also how they receive back from the individual in real time the vital signs, the emotions, the thoughts, what the person's seeing, what the person's hearing.
Are you mentally ill or a victim of mind control technologies? It is not science fiction. It is happening in every country. There are millions of victims worldwide. We can stop this program by informing and educating everyone. This is where my book comes in to educate the general public. This book describes the technologies, tactics, techniques, methods used in this program. It helps the reader to detect, collect, and organize evidence. The book is available on Amazon, Google, Apple, Kobo, and on all the major platforms.